Mr. Speaker, the Majority Leader mentioned a number of things that the tax bill that is going to be coming before us will do. I don't believe that the conference report is available for review at this point in time. Can the Majority Leader perhaps enlighten me as to whether or not the conference report is available now to be reviewed, or if not, when it will be available? Now I yield to my friend.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I expect the report to be filed and online tomorrow. As you know, you've got to go through and make sure from a joint tax, filling in the dollar figures, and all anticipation is it will be online tomorrow for all of America to read.
Gentlemen, it's my understanding that that will be on the floor as early as Tuesday of next week. Is that accurate? I yield to my friend.
Yes, that is accurate.
Mr. Speaker, I would simply observe that what the Majority Leader did not mention, and again, I have not seen the conference report, so this is not based upon a review of the conference report, but based upon what the Senate bill and the House bills that were passed by both bodies. It will increase the debt of our country by some $1.5 trillion and a minimum of $1 trillion. It will raise taxes on some 78 million Americans, between 50,000 of family income and 150,000 of income. I am assuming that the elimination of the mandate is still in the conference report. I'm not sure, but the information I have is that it's still in the report. That, Mr. Speaker, will cost 13 million people to be uninsured as a result. I have information, Mr. Speaker, that what the conference report does is reduces taxes on some of the wealthiest people in America. I'm not sure how they offset that, maybe with a mandate, maybe with something else, but 62% of the bill's resources go to the top 1% in America. Speaker, Speaker Ryan, spoke about on this floor the average family making $59,000 a year. He mentioned that that family will get, under the House bill, again, I haven't seen the conference report, get $1,182 per year in a tax cut. What the Speaker did not mention is that the family in the top 1% will get a tax cut of $1,198 per week. Per week, Mr. Speaker. In other words, 52 times what the struggling American will get. What the American that the Speaker Ryan said may not be able to come up with $500 if they have a crisis with a refrigerator or their heating unit, something of that nature, or their car breaks down. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the aisle do not believe that this bill addresses relief for the struggling working men and women of this country. And Mr. Speaker, it's clear in all of the polling that the average working American shares that view. They believe correctly that this is a tax cut for the rich and a few sprinkles to the middle class. I'm sure the leader will have something to say on that. In addition, Mr. Speaker, it is ironic that what will happen in this tax bill is we will phase out. Again, I have not seen the conference report, so I don't know exactly whether that's true or not. But in both the House and Senate bills, we phased out, we didn't phase out, proposed to be phased out, the benefits to those middle-income, hard-working Americans. We'll see their benefits phased out. That will not be true of corporations. It will not be true of the wealthiest in our country. So it's troubling, Mr. Speaker, that a bill of this magnitude is being rushed to judgment. In 1986, the gentleman in making his announcement said, "We've been working on this for 31 years. Now, I presume he was talking about from 1986 to 2017. What he did not say, Mr. Speaker, is in 1986, we had 30 days of public hearings on a bill. 30 days of public hearings. What he did not say is that we had 450 witnesses during those public hearings testifying about the taxes. What he did not say is that there were nearly 4 months of hearings on the 1986 Reform Bill. And what he did not say is that the Ways and Means Committee conducted 26 days of markup. This bill has received less than 7 days of markup in both bodies and in the conference. This is being rushed to judgment, and the American people, by substantial numbers, believe this bill is not good for them. Now, Mr. Collins said that he talked to a donor, and the donor said, "Don't call me again if you don't pass this tax bill." I get that. I don't know who the donor was. I don't know how rich the donor was. But obviously the donor thought that he had a real stake, or she had a real stake, in this tax bill. We regret that we are not doing as we did in 1986, because what the Majority Leader did not mention either was that the 1986 bill was a bipartisan bill, with President Reagan and President O'Neill supporting it, with Chairman Rostenkowski, a Democratic chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, and a Republican chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Bob Packwood from Oregon, supporting the bill. It was a bipartisan bill. And what the Majority Leader did not mention is the 1986 bill did not add a single cent to the deficit. It was paid for. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a much lesser product than it could have been. We on this side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, think we need tax reform. We're prepared to support tax reform. We believe we need to bring down the corporate rate. We believe we need to make sure that small businesses can grow and prosper and grow into large businesses. What we don't believe in, Mr. Speaker, is simply having a bill that advantages the best off in our country and says that the advantages we give to the middle class will be phased out in a little bit, about 5 years. So, Mr. Speaker, we will, according to the Majority Leader, consider this bill next week. It will not be bipartisan, and that's a shame. It will not be positive for the country, because it will put us even more deeply into debt. And the people who will pay that bill ultimately will be our children. And on both sides of the aisle, we don't have a lot of members on the floor, but I say to every member on the floor, every member on this floor, I'm sure at some point in time you've given a speech somewhere that said, we care about the debt. We're going to bring down the debt. This bill does not do it. This bill exacerbates the debt, and anybody who believes that this bill is going to pay for itself through dynamic scoring and economic growth is kidding themselves. It's a rationalization to vote for a bill that main imperative is political, not policy. Because my Republican colleagues, Mr. Speaker, believe that if they don't pass this bill, they will lose the next election. I've heard that argument over and over and over again. That is not a reason to vote for this bill. It is a reason to say, let's go back to the table. Let's include Mr. Neal in the consideration, the ranking member. Let's include Mr. Wyden, the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. Let's include Mr. McCarthy and myself to try to see if we can reach a bipartisan, positive, constructive piece of legislation, which will, like the 1986 legislation, enjoy the support of a wide range of the American people and their representatives. Now, Mr. Speaker, we had an election yesterday in Alabama. Mr. Jones won that election. Mr. Strange, the incumbent Republican representing Alabama right now, lost the primary. He has no mandate. Why rush this bill through? This bill, if it was passed on December 31st of next year, would affect the 2018 taxes that would be filed in April of 2019. The need to rush this bill, Mr. Speaker, seems to be that, and the reason for having no hearings, the reason for having no witnesses, is because this bill on its merit cannot sustain itself. Now, let me read you a quote, Mr. Speaker. I think the message of the moment is that the American people all across the country are asking us, even in the most liberal state, Massachusetts, to stop this health care bill. I think that means there will be no more health care votes in the Senate prior to the swearing in of Scott Brown, whenever that may be. That statement was made on January 20th, 2010, by the present Majority Leader, who was then, of course, the Minority Leader. And his proposition was, you ought to wait until Scott Brown is here so that Massachusetts can have its vote counted. But hypocritically, he's changed his tune today. When Alabama, a very conservative state, the opposite of Massachusetts, has voted to elect Doug Jones to the Senate. And I don't hear Mr. McConnell or anybody else saying, let's wait for the duly elected member of the United States Senate from Alabama to be seated so that he will have an opportunity to vote on this extraordinarily consequential vote and, in my opinion, negative consequences to our country. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Majority Leader might have some comments he wants to make in response, and therefore I yield to my friend, Mr. McCarthy.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. There's a lot of questions about a schedule. I took notes because there was a lot of things said. But let me first, to make sure I can try to get through all of them. You first mentioned many times, but I did not mention. Now, I was asked the question, when would we vote on the tax bill? So I want to be very clear. I answered the question. I said, yes, we'll vote on it Tuesday. You said you've heard that it could be Tuesday, so I just said yes, and I didn't mention others because I wasn't asked other questions. But now that we have, let's walk through this. One of your first arguments was debt. Do you realize in this pro-growth, tax-cutting, job creation bill, if it just grows 0.4%, it pays for all of it? But what's interesting here is, don't take my word for it. What happens every day to the market when they realize Congress and Senate is one day closer to passing the tax bill? Everybody with a 401k gets a pay raise. The market has set more than 59 records since the election and the movement to passing a tax bill. And that's for all Americans invested. Everybody's retirement is getting a little better because of it. Now, what about on the jobs perspective? Well, Broadcom, which was created in America, but left America based upon the current tax code, on the day of the announcement of our tax bill said, we're coming back. It's not just that we're bringing so many jobs back. We're going to spend $3 billion a year in R&D. We're going to spend $6 billion in manufacturing. And that's $20 billion a year in revenue for that company that's going to pay taxes now in America. But I wonder, that's a big company. You know what I just read the other day? Company announcing they're going to Syracuse, New York, based upon our tax bill. Yeah, things are changing in America. People are excited about it. But it's not just those that are going to hire these thousands of Americans to work. I want to make sure it happens in Maryland as well. So I wanted to look at your district. So here we go. My good friend represents Maryland 5th. He's done it for quite some time. Here are a few facts. Currently, you have 47% of filers in Maryland 5 that take the standard deduction. So they'll be better off because they'll get a doubling the day the president signs it. Another 11% have itemized deductions that are less than our new hired standard deduction. So they too will save. Not only are they going to save money, they're going to save time. Instead of spending weeks of trying to fill out a tax code, it's going to be in minutes. And you know when they fill it out, their tax reform, they're going to get money. But they don't have to wait till April 15th. Not only in your district, but across this country. Check your check come February. Because you know what's going to be in that check? More money. Because the standard deduction goes up. But, so that's 58% of my friend's district is better off than day one. But from what you tell me, you don't think that's good enough to vote for. A majority of your district is better off on day one. That's not even talking about the small businesses. Do you know the small businesses in your district? Those that are earning $400,000, they're going to save $19,000. And I'm not sure if, I know we're dear friends, but I'm not sure if I've ever known that you had owned a business. You know my background, when I was 20, I started my first business. There was 3 lessons I learned that have never left me. I was the first one to work. I was the last one to leave, and I was the last one to be paid. This is going to create more entrepreneurship, more opportunity, and more people are going to be hired. Now, I know you're worried about the debt, but it just strikes me. This year, you voted for a budget just a couple months ago. I'm not going to go back to another Congress that increased the deficit by $6.8 trillion. So we're only worried about the debt at certain times. Well, this bill is actually going to grow the economy, as we've watched quarter after quarter after quarter of a new administration. Now, I've got to make sure I got all of it. You talked about hearings. We've had 59 public hearings. We printed out before we even ran to continue the majority about what we would do on tax. But let's get to the core. That was your district. Let's say to all Americans. It doesn't matter where you live. So in any body, it doesn't matter if you sit on that side of the aisle, on this side of the aisle. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, or you're a socialist. It doesn't matter what you are. You're an American first. And you know what your constituents are going to see? Let's take the average family. The average family of 4 making $55,000. You can write this down. You know how much tax they're going to pay? 0. 0. But that still is not good enough for you. It's very interesting. In my social science studies of what the party on the other side of the aisle used to say they were for. I believe in the day, if you would have stood up here and said, I got a tax bill that's going to make sure the average family of 4, and the first $55,000 is going to pay 0, they not only would be excited, they would vote for it. And you talk to me about bipartisanship. I really think that's a question for you. Bipartisanship. It's bipartisanship when we reach out to you about CHIP, about health care for children, a place not to play politics. We even stopped a hearing and a markup that we had scheduled well in the future because you came to us, your side of the aisle, and asked us to because you thought you could come to an agreement. Then we were told by your leadership, no, nobody could vote for it. We put a bill that put things in the bill that we thought you would even want. But no, you still voted no. And how many times have you told me on this floor, and it was just a few months ago, and I'll quote you if I may, on CR. About government funding. Because I was concerned, because I had read some articles in the New York Times that suggested, as a minority party struggling to show resistance in an era of President Trump, that Democrats are now ready to let the lights of government go dark. And I read that to you because I wanted to know, was that true or is that false? Well, you said to me, when I asked my friend whether that rumor was true, he replied, "Nobody on my side is talking about wanting to shut the government down." "We don't want to shut the government down," was your quote. You continue to say, "I would assure my friend that it is neither our intent nor our desire. Matter of fact, we want to work quickly to avoid that happening." That's not good, obviously, for the American people. It's not good for managers trying to plan on how to deliver services, and it's certainly not good for our federal employees. So I want to work with you to make sure that doesn't happen. Mr. Speaker, that was in March, just 9 months ago. And I wonder what changed in those 9 months. Because just last week, and I tell my friend, there was no partisanship in putting a continuing resolution on the floor for 2 weeks. There was no poison pill on this side of the aisle. It was a clean one. And I watched, sitting at this desk, what the vote was going, and I watched the other side, Mr. Speaker. I watched people, not that they just voted no, they were whipped into the position to vote no. I watched the tally. And once that tally got past the magic number of 218, I watched my good friend put his thumb up. Because he gave the okay to those 14 Democrats at his conference that were sitting there that were told not to vote until it passed. I just wonder what happened to bipartisanship on something that is so bipartisan. I know the thousands of federal employees you have in your district. But that is just, I listened, Mr. Speaker, to the leader of the Democratic Party on the other side who said just 2 days prior, the only person talking about the shutdown is President Trump. Well, the only person taking action and whipping to get to a shutdown was on this floor. We've had open hearings, Republican and Democrats. We've had an open, bipartisan, bicameral conference. They've walked through an entire bill. We've made sure the Americans are going to get a tax cut and jobs are going to be created. It is already happening before the bill is even signed. I'm not sure if I didn't mention something else, because you try to correct if something was not mentioned. But I wanted to make sure I answered all those questions for you. Because I know, not just in your district, that every family of four making $55,000 will pay nothing, that all the small businesses that are going to hire new people. And I differ from you. Maybe you whip strongly against it like you whip strongly against the CR and keeping government open. But I still think when I look up on that tally on the tax bill, I think there'll be some on your side. And why do I think that? Because they told me so. So the only difference will be at the end of the day if they don't, if you keep the strong arm and instead of releasing the thumb up once it passes and put it down, that's the only reason we won't have bipartisan on the floor that day. But I believe in America. I believe in this floor, and I believe in the individuals who fight so strongly to get here to represent their constituents. That they know the new jobs in their district. They know how much those families will save, and they will not let politics get the best of them. They will go against the tide to stop, that they believe that it will even be better. So I look forward to that day. I also look forward to you coming back to the quote you told me 9 months ago. Because you know what? It is close to Christmas. We have military men and women defending us. You talked about that bill the president recently signed, that yes, you work strong-armed with me, that's going to make government more effective, efficient, and accountable. It also had a pay raise for our men and women. And when you voted no, you told them they weren't getting their raise. But worse, you went even further. You questioned whether they could actually have the funds to continue to battle where they needed to be. We've been through shutdowns. We know nobody wins. I believe you, what you told me 9 months ago. I just want you to come back. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. He made a number of points. First, generally, I've been here long enough to have heard the debate in the 1981 bill, the so-called supply side. Jack Kemp, George Bush, Vice President Bush referred to it as voodoo economics. In point of fact, as the gentleman knows, because I'm sure he knows the record, we increased the debt under Ronald Reagan 189%. Larger than any other president with whom I've served over the last 37 years. 189%. Stockman said that we knew it wasn't going to balance the budget. We just said that for political purposes. Stockman said that. He was director of the OMB under Ronald Reagan. And then in 2001 and 2003, we had tax cuts. We heard the same arguments. How it was going to grow robustly the economy. And it brought in the deepest recession anybody in this chamber, other than perhaps Sam Johnson, who I think is probably our oldest member, because the rest of us didn't experience the Depression. It ushered in not the biggest growth rate in America, but the least job-producing 8 years of any American president that I've served with, and the deepest recession that anybody in this body has experienced, and a hemorrhaging of jobs. And in fact, the stock market, which the gentleman refers to, had a 25% decline in value over the 8 years of the Bush administration, with 2 tax cuts, where exactly the same argument for growth was made. And it didn't happen. On the other hand, I was here in 1993 when we raised taxes, not much, but a little bit, particularly for infrastructure. And the prediction, Mr. Leader, on your side of the aisle, we would tank as an economy. We would have a terrible recession. Exactly the opposite happened. You were dead, not you personally, but those who made that representation were 180 degrees wrong. First of all, we balanced the budget 4 years in a row. Nobody has done that other than President Clinton. Now, you can say you were in charge of the Congress. You were. And I will respond to you, why couldn't you do it under George Bush when you had everything? There's no answer to that. So in terms of the experience that we've had, when we had tax cuts, the debt did, in fact, explode. 189% increase in the national debt. That was approximately 2.5 times the increase under Obama and the increase under George Bush. But we continue to argue this is going to be great growth. No reputable economist agrees with that proposition. Well, you read them out to me. I'll be glad to hear them. The stock market increase under this president, it's going up. It went up 300% under Barack Obama. 300%. 300%. From 6,500 to over 18,000. He had the largest job production, and I told my friend, in the last 2016, as opposed to 2017, here, my friends, there were 279,000 more jobs created in 2016 under Barack Obama than have been created under this president. 279 more. Now, that's not a great deal. But in terms of growth, there was more growth of jobs in 2016 when Obama was president of the United States than has occurred under Donald Trump. Check the records. I'm sure you'll review my, let's see if Hoyer's just given us some malarkey. The gentleman talks about this great tax benefit. What he didn't mention, and what I was referring to, by the way, was when you were giving the schedule, not in response to the question. But that aside, doesn't mention the state and local taxes. Now, I'm not sure exactly what's happened to state and local taxes. But in my state, it will have a very substantial negative effect. Why? Because we have a significant income tax. Why? Because we think that's a progressive tax and puts the burden on those who have more. Now, you may disagree with that. Just have a flat tax, no matter what you have, you pay the same thing. I'm not sure exactly what you've done. You took shutdown, you talk about. You had 90 people vote against a CR that you recommended they vote for in September, which was a clean CR. You would not have passed that CR. You would have shut down government. You're responsible for keeping government open, you being your party. You're in the majority. The only reason that CR passed was because we voted for it. You had 90 of your people vote against it. 90. Who apparently didn't want to pay the military, apparently didn't want to protect them overseas. You know, that proposition, like they say, won't hunt. Because the chairman of the Armed Services Committee voted against that CR. Why? Because he thought it was harmful to the national security of our country. Mr. Secretary Mattis believes the CR is damaging. So it is inappropriate, in my view, when we do something and says, we don't like this bill. And the only party with whom I've served who has consciously, purposefully shut down the government, I tell my friend, Mr. Speaker, is the Republican Party. They did it in 1995 under Newt Gingrich, and they did it last year with Mr. Cruz coming over here and saying, shut down the government unless they repeal the ACA. Shut it down, consciously. We have never done that. Have we had to shut down because we couldn't get agreement? We've done that for a few days. But for 16 days, you cut it down consciously. And guess what? When you voted to open up the government, guess who voted against it? Mr. Mulvaney, the director of the OMB. He voted against opening up government. I guess he was against the armed forces. I guess he was against defending our country, if that's your proposition. S-chip. You're right, you waited. We didn't get an agreement. But we waited long after 9:30 when the gentleman says he's very concerned about funding it. The authorization expired. Now, you passed ultimately a bill that we didn't vote for. You passed it on your own. If you really were that concerned, you would have passed it before the bill authorization expired. On September 30th, we passed it some weeks later. And we passed it with a piece of funding in there that's going to undermine, for instance, just as one example, vaccination for children. Because you funded it in part by reducing substantially the prevention fund, which seeks to prevent illness. On bipartisanship, very frankly, we had a 2-week, you're right, 2-week CR, you got a 2-week CR. The only thing you've worked on, from our perspective, is the tax bill. And you did not include us in those discussions. You had closed hearings. We had a conference hearing yesterday. Mr. Neal tried to move an amendment out of order. Wasn't accepted. It was a done deal in secret. I tell my friend, I reread a little bit of Young Guns last night. Talk about transparency. Talk about openness. Talk about doing things one at a time, not packaging a lot of bills. The reason we all hate CRs is because nobody knows what's in a CR. We lard it down. And this CR is larded down with numerous, and we're talking about a tax bill, but the CR that the gentleman talked about is 5 or 6 major pieces of legislation put in one package. Take it or leave it. That's not the way to run this organization, and that's what you guys said in Young Guns. And I agree with you. But it's not what you've done. It's what you said, but it's not what you've done. Let me just close on this side of the, and frankly, I was going to talk about the CR, but I'm talking about it now. We don't have a budget caps deal. Today's the 12th, 13th, 14th. So we are essentially 15 days, 17 days from the end of the year. We don't have a caps deal. We don't have a disaster supplemental for Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands that's proposed to be in this CR, as I understand it. And the fires in California. The gentleman's absolutely correct. And we're going to support helping the folks of California who've been devastated by these fires. The gentleman's absolutely correct. We don't have anything on Dreamers. We think that's critically important. I said to the Majority Leader 4 months ago that we felt this was critically important and we needed to get this done. I think, as I've said to the gentleman, we have over 300 votes on this floor for a bill to get this done. The Alexander Murray, I don't know, I haven't seen the conference report, but Alexander Murray, which tries to stabilize the availability of health care at a reasonable price to the American people, I don't think that's in the tax bill as I understand it. VA choice funding, I think, is in the CR. I haven't seen exactly what it says. Opioids funding, I had a thing in my district. In every district in America, opioids is a critical crisis. There's no funding in the CR, as I understand, for that. The fire grants program for our emergency responders, no money for that. Perkins loans, nothing for that. The debt limit is going to come later. National flood insurance program, nothing for that, as I understand it. Medicare and other health extenders, 702 of FISA to keep America secure and strong and safe. As I understand it, none of that's being dealt with. So the reason we voted against the last CR is because we're tired of kicking things down the road. We're tired of kicking the can down the road. We want to get to agreement on a bipartisan basis to pass legislation that's positive for our country. And that's why we may vote against this next CR, because we ought to stop just kicking the can down the road. And we're going to kick the can, as I understand it, down the road at some point in time to January 19th is the discussion. Mr. Leader, Mr. Speaker, we're prepared to sit down and try to reach agreement on these issues that have got to be reached. And if we don't reach them, America will be less safe, less secure, less healthy as an economy, and less healthy literally in terms of making sure that the health care available to America is on a stable path. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will yield to the Majority Leader and then make a few comments and then we'll close. I yield to my friend.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I do look forward to these colloquies. And I first want to make sure history has it right. 137 economists sent a letter to Congress supporting our tax reform effort and saying it will accelerate growth. I don't know if you dislike these 137, but these are economists. I don't judge the difference. History says President Obama added more than $8 trillion to the national debt. Now, how does that measure against all the others? Well, that's more than 43 prior presidents combined. That's what history shows. My friend is correct. He has been here much longer than I have. You actually had the majority for 40 years. You didn't balance the budget during that time. There was a common denominator that got the budget balanced in those 4 years, and that was a Republican majority. Had to fight for it to get there. You raised some other issues. You brought an issue up of the number of days. I don't think we should waste any time. You brought an issue up of we don't have a cap agreement to be able to work forward. It wasn't you, but it was your leader on the other side who decided not to go to a meeting at the White House. You say we should not waste our time on the floor. It wasn't this side, but we did have to take time up on this floor to make a motion to impeach the president. We took that time up on the floor. We didn't take the time up for Chip, for the others. I do remember the quote from my friend. We differ sometimes philosophically, but we are friends. And we're friends because I admire you. I admire the principles. There are times I've watched you stand for what you have said for years, and maybe your party has a different position. You don't hide from it. This is what you told the American public you would do, and you vote that way. And you will stand and oppose me because it's what you've said in the past and what you said you would do. But this is not something new. You have always said funding our government is not a game. When one side wins and the other side loses, a shutdown is not a political football to be tossed around so casually. I was personally shocked last week. I wondered what would have happened as I watched your operation whip people to a no. As we watched the time click, as you watched, you held those who stood by the voting booth that wanted to vote yes but could not. Had we not gotten the enough votes to keep government open, would your side of the aisle applauded? Would your side of the aisle thought they won victory? And you do go back, and it is correct. There were 90 members on this side of the aisle that didn't vote for a CR. But you, like myself, understand a CR is usually a responsibility of both because it's bipartisan. No one's getting anything, and no one wants to end to that position. We don't want to be in a CR, and we don't want to vote for a CR. That's why we came to you so many times in the past when it came to CHIP. But yes, I understand sometimes people can use it for politics. Let's push it all to the end so maybe we get an advantage with something else. We wanted an agreement. That's why staff of those 4 leaders have been meeting and actually came to a pretty close agreement. So what do they do next? Take it to the next level. Let's go to the White House, because the White House has been in those meetings the same time because the president has to sign the bill, the Senate, the House, and leaders on both sides. But when that meeting came, just a few short weeks ago, wouldn't show up. And I take you at your word that you're willing to sit down. The rest of your leadership has to be willing to sit down too. But this idea that we want to hold government hostage, so many times I've heard you in the past say that was wrong. You ask about the things that haven't been done. The thing I love the most, I believe in metrics. You have to be honest metrics. And I'll share them with you because I share them with our side of the aisle because I want us to be judged. I want us to know exactly where we are, and if we're not where we said we're going to be, we should actually work harder. So I took the first Congress of every new president since H.W. Bush. I want to see how many bills come through committee. Because you're right. When you read the Young Guns book, and I'm not saying to buy it in any shape or form because I don't want to cause any ethic issues, but I don't get any money from it anyway, so I give it to the veterans. I don't even know if it's in print. But I want the bills to come through committee because that's where the expertise, that's where the open public process is. That's where amendments get to be offered, won or lost. You know what? More bills in a first Congress since H.W. Bush have gone through committee. Now let's measure how many bills have gotten off this floor. Do you realize more bills have been passed out of this Congress than any Congress in the first term of a president in modern history back to H.W. Bush? And we did it by going through a transparent, open process. Exactly what we pledged we would do in that book. So yes, I'm glad you read it, and I'm glad you took the words, and I'll love to show you the graphs. But let's walk back to this. Government funding is important. And let's talk about it. Here are the facts. By mid-July, all 12 appropriation bills passed both subcommittee and full committee. That was July. On July 27th, we passed the 4 appropriation bills off the House floor, which provided for critical national security. Now, my friend and nearly all the Democrats, they voted no. On September 14th, we passed the remaining 8 appropriation bills off this floor. Now, my friend and nearly all the Democrats voted no. But the most disappointing vote, as I mentioned, was last week on December 7th. To fund the government, my friend and the Democrats all voted no. You know, when I was young and I didn't always get my way, I'd go to my parents and I'd complain. But it's really odd that we got to this floor in a different nature, that someone would complain about something not getting done and never voting for anything. I like my friend. I want my friend who for decades has talked about not to play games with the funding of government. I don't know where you've gone, but I want you to come back. I think America needs you back. I think that leadership will be important for both sides. And I would tell you, I would have been disappointed in you if I watched you applaud if you were successful in shutting down government, because I know that's not the man you are. I know that's not the person and the principles of what you stand for. And you know what? All those votes you go back and said on this side of the aisle didn't vote for, I stood and voted for those. Because leadership is different. We do take votes that are tougher than others. We do have to put politics aside. And we do have to look out for the best of this country. It may not be the mood of the politics on TV that maybe wants to fight more or throw another motion on the floor to impeach. But there is a time that we should rise above. And I think going into the end of this year, we should think anew and act anew. I think America should not see a Christmas because one side of the aisle wanted to shut it down. Not for any other reason that they voted no on all the bills that would have kept it open. If you had a cause, if you had a desire, and if you had a big desire, you would have shown up to the meeting to actually get the answer. We could have a cap deal. We could be done with it. We could make sure our men and women get the raise they deserve. We could make sure that those in theater have every opportunity that they're able to carry out their mission that we ask them to do in the safest manner possible. That's what I want to see. I yield back.
Come back, Shane. Maybe many of you are not old enough to remember that wonderful movie as Shane rode off and the little boy intoned, "Come back, Shane." I haven't gone anywhere. Democrats have no ability to shut down the government on the floor of this House. Hear me. We don't have the votes to shut down government. And we don't want to shut down government. And maybe the leader also wants those 90 of his. He's not our leader. He's the leader of the majority party. And 90 of his people did not follow him. I presume he must be much more concerned about that. With all due respect, he's my friend, but not my leader. And we voted to give 90 days. And nothing was accomplished in that 90 days other than work on a tax bill that we think is a disaster for this country. Nothing. And he talks about passing these appropriation bills. We knew they wouldn't pass the Senate. And we told him so. And we said, let's do it on a bipartisan basis. But no, and by the way, Mr. Speaker, it was the least regular order prior to an omnibus at the end of the year of dealing with appropriation bills that I have ever seen. They packaged, I think it was 4 or 5 the first time, 4, I think, and then the balance of 8. We didn't consider them individually. We didn't have an opportunity to consider them thoughtfully. No, it was one big package. 4 against. I said I read that book. It was anything but regular order. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, the majority party that passed them is the majority in the United States Senate. And not a single one of those bills Not a single one has passed out of the House. Excuse me, the Senate. Not a single one has gone to the President of the United States. Not one. And the Republicans are in charge of the House and the Senate. Not a single bill has gone to the President of the United States. And Harry Reid's no longer there just to beat on. Oh, it's Harry Reid. Now, what it would have taken to pass some of those appropriation bills in the Senate is some compromise. And that didn't happen. So don't wring your hands about how bad it is that we haven't had bipartisanship on the appropriation bills. We haven't. Or bipartisanship on the CR when you lose 90 of your people. 90 Republicans voted against a simple CR. You say simple CR, nothing to be partisan about, etc. 90 of your people voted no.
That wasn't simple.
I'll yield to my friend.
Let's make sure we're going apples to apples. That had a debt ceiling in it. And there's times on this floor.
Reclaiming my time, just so the gentleman can further explain, does that mean 90 of your people did not want to pay the bills of the United States and default on our debt? And I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. But if you're going to compare a CR that you said was simple, it's not simple. We all know that. If you're going to compare it to the CR that you voted against last week, that had no debt ceiling on it. You explained to me numerous times of how many CRs you voted for in the past on this body, how Democrats came over with Republicans. Because you know what? You and I both know that's normally how it works. Because a CR is not an advantage for one or the other. And this is what I'm most upset with. Our founding fathers created a body that could have compromise. But for some reason in today's society, it's not just that you want one side to win, you want to try to crush the other side. That's not crushing one side or the other, that's actually hurting the American public. So in a situation that we know of a continuing resolution is going to be short-term and 2 weeks, yeah, I would expect half of the votes to come from your side and half the votes to come from ours. That is what has happened in the past. I'm just wondering where that went.
Reclaiming my time. Mr. Leader, let me say to you very respectfully, do not expect cooperation from our side if we don't get cooperation from your side, if we don't get some inclusion in making decisions. We are, after all, 194 members of this body. From time to time, you and I do work together, and when we work together, we get majorities. We pass pieces of legislation. You have not passed a single controversial fiscal bill on this floor without our substantial help until last week. You got 120, or you got 200, and I forget, it was about 30 on that last bill. But let me tell you, the reason we voted against it is because we knew exactly what was going to happen. Nothing. There would be no agreement on CHIP. There is no agreement on CHIP. There would be no agreement on FISA. There has been no agreement on FISA. There would be no agreement on flood control. There has been no agreement on flood control. So we knew that we were not going to get any bipartisan buy-in, so all we were doing is delaying the inevitable. But let me tell you, when we did defeat the Homeland Security bill, you remember that, I'm sure. We did. You were in the majority. You came back to the floor and said we're going to meet tomorrow, and we reached an agreement, and we passed it. Very frankly, you have never heard us say that as a policy, in order to get the ACA repealed or Gingrich wanting to get some fiscal thing done, that we would shut down the government. 3 times you shut it down in 95 and 96, 3 times, intentionally. That was your policy. And yes, if you're going to take the government hostage and force us to do something that we think is inimical to the best interests of this country, yes, Mr. Leader, you will leave us with no other option to pretend that we're keeping government moving but not getting any agreement. I talked to you very sincerely 4 months ago about one of the things that we wanted to get done before the end of this year were dreamers, protected, who are now vulnerable and very scared that they're going to be sent back to some place they do not know, have not lived in, brought here as children through no fault of their own, gone to elementary school, junior high school, college, served in the military, working at jobs, been vetted to make sure that they haven't done anything wrong. And they're afraid of being sent back home. Not back home, excuse me, I say that. That's not their home. This is their home. And nothing's been done on that. I know you have a task force and talked about it, but we haven't done anything. There's no reason why we can't. I think we have 300 votes on this floor to get that done.
May I respond?
I'll yield to my friend.
The gentleman is correct. There's many times we've worked together, from sanctions, from Homeland, from others. We work very well together. But the gentleman knows I came to you about CHIP. When the committee was directed on your side of the aisle not to do anything with the majority party. So I came to you because of our history.
Who the gentleman is relying on for that information, but I will tell you, I have talked to Mr. Pallone. That is not correct. I don't know who you think directed him not to reach an agreement, but I will tell you, after you made that assertion, I think last week or the week before, I went to Mr. Pallone, I asked him that, he said absolutely not, and I yield back.
All right.
I yield to my friend.
Well, I came to you. It was under my impression that a member came to me and said that. Maybe that's not true. Maybe that's not what Pallone want, but I came to you and I said, you know what? Let's get together and let's work this out. I don't want to make CHIP partisan in any shape or form. And we met, and we tried to work, and you came back to me and said, you got to go alone. I said, that's not how I want to do it. So what we did was we took everything we heard from the hearings. I even, in good faith, the chairman of that committee, Greg Walden, stopped a markup in the hopes, because you requested, not you, but your ranking member, that they weren't prepared, that they wanted more time. So we want to do everything in our power. But at the end of the day, you couldn't be there. And twice, your side of the aisle and yourself voted against CHIP. You can't argue against it now. You vote against it. And when you talk about appropriations, I'm very proud of what we did on appropriations. We haven't been able to do that in quite some time. But there were, in those first 4 bills, every single one of those 12 bills went through subcommittee and full committee. There was 126 amendments in the first 4. There are 342.
Let me reclaim my time for just a
Please.
second and yield back to you. Is the gentleman proud that you control the House, you control the Senate, and you haven't sent a single appropriation bill to the president?
You know, I thank the gentleman.
One.
No,
Not
and
one.
that's why
I
want you to join with me and get the Senate to move, because as the gentleman knows, you don't control the Senate when you have 51 or 52 members. Because you know what happens? It takes 60. Now, I don't firmly believe in that, but that's the way they play it over in the Senate. That is why, when you don't have a cap agreement, that you need all 4 leaders to go to the White House, but when the 2 won't show up, the best thing to do is don't show up, then go and complain, I don't have an agreement. The best way to complain is get all 12 votes, all 12 bills off this floor with a simple majority. If that's good enough for America inside Congress, it should be good enough on the Senate side. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So your side is able to hold it up. And I'm ashamed of that as well. Thank you.
Reclaiming my time. What it would have meant, you would have had a compromise. That's why the Senate has that 60-vote rule. I'm not crazy about it myself. But that's why they have the 60-vote rule. And they think it's good, because that's why they've kept it. They think it's good because it requires compromise. It requires agreement. It requires moving ahead on a piece of legislation. And I will tell you, I served on the Appropriations Committee for 23 years, and we reached agreement between Republicans and Democrats on almost every bill. And when we had the bills, they weren't partisan bills, and they got a lot of Republican votes, almost always when we were in charge. Not all the time, almost always. And if you are a party of no compromise, you can't move things in the United States. And I get that. But that's the reason. That's the reason, because you couldn't reach compromise. Now, very frankly, a lot of the bills have come out of the committee. You know why they came out of committee? Because they were bipartisan. But they haven't been brought to the floor by Mr. McConnell, and they haven't been sent to the President of the United States. So, somewhat crocodile tears. And yes, you passed those 12 bills, just like you can pass the CRs on your own without any help from us. And if the government shuts down, it is because you can't get your majority of your party to pass bills. No, you're in charge.
I asked the gentleman to yield.
I still have the time, and I'm going to yield to you. There is no doubt when we were in charge and you didn't support us, we passed every piece of legislation we wanted to pass on this floor with 218 Democrats. We were united as a party. Now, we lost some, but never enough to make it that we didn't get 218. You lost 90. You can say it was on the debt. You can say it was on national security. You can say whatever you want on it. You brought a bill to the floor, and 90 of your people voted against it to keep government open, to keep government operating. And very frankly, we voted with you so that we could get some work done. And we haven't gotten work done. That's what frustrates us. That's what frustrates the American people. And I will tell my friend, at the end of the day, after this Congress is gone, historians are not going to be kind, notwithstanding the fact you say you passed so many bills. You passed so many bills on a partisan basis, and you used essentially the 51 vote because you didn't want to compromise. We get it. You don't want to compromise. You don't want to work with us. You didn't have any hearings on this tax bill. We were not included in any phase of the marking up and fashioning of this tax bill. Now, I'm about ready to yield back the balance of my time. I'm sure everybody who wants to give a 1 minute or a special order is very happy to hear that. But I'll yield to my friend.
Thank you. The gentleman is correct about compromise, but there is a real big difference between compromise and obstruction.
And
it takes to obstruct, when you talked about the Senate. It takes 60 votes to even get onto a bill. I know as well as my friend that you can utilize the Senate and the leadership in the House to stop something if you want to. And I will tell my friend that I am disappointed. What will you say to the 62,000? What will you say to the 62,000 federal employees who live in your district? What will you say to them that every quote you made in the past that you should not play games with funding and shutting down the government? You may think you can make that statement here. Your leader may think she could say that only the president was talking about a shutdown. The president never whipped one vote to shut it down. He whipped it to stay open. History won't be kind. Yes, we will come to a conclusion next week.
Well,
you know what? Every time you ask about
the gentleman yield.
Yes.
I'll reclaim my time. Does the gentleman remember President Trump saying a good shutdown will be good for government? Did you remember him saying that? When you tell me about how he's been down here lobbying for that, he said, quote, a good shutdown may be good for government. I yield to my friend.
I thank my friend for yielding. I understand what his words said. I also watched his action. I also watched what he did last week to get members to vote to keep it open, because you know what? Things did change. There was not compromise, even though the bill was a compromise, because there was no poison pill in it. Maybe we look back, if we're going to carry everything ourselves, maybe we should put something in it. But it was a compromise, but unfortunately, you changed on the other side. You decided now's the time to shut the government down. Try to make blame to somebody else. The American people will see through that. And I will guarantee you that 62,000 people who work for the federal government in the Maryland 5th District will not take that as an answer. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I would again reiterate, the majority party can do whatever it wants on this floor. It could have kept government open. It could have kept policies moving with its votes. Time after time after time on critical issues confronting this country, they couldn't come up with a majority. As a matter of fact, on one occasion, Mr. McCarthy was the whip, Mr. Cannon was the majority leader, and Mr. Boehner was the speaker. And they offered a bill to keep government moving. They only got 84 of their colleagues, approximately 1/3, 1/3 of their colleagues on their side of the aisle to vote with them. I don't want to hear about us shutting down government. We can't shut down government. They're in charge. The majority has the votes. You can do whatever you want. We get it. We may not like it any more than you liked it, but we get it. But we voted on the hope that we would get some work done. We haven't moved any place except on the tax bill, which we think is bad for this country, in the last 90 days since we passed. And we passed. Would not have passed without us, that CR. And yes, we will not be held hostage. And yes, we will oppose what we think is a very, very bad tax bill. And we think is an effort to avoid getting the work of this House done. And I yield back the balance of my time.